VidDevoBible, 7 minutes in the Word of God. Genesis 1:3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. What can you say in 7 minutes for one sentence? What can you add to the Word of God that would make it any more clear or any more descriptive? What would you take from that one sentence and eliminate the power of the Word of God to speak for itself or to understand or be understood by itself? And God said, let there be light, and there was light. More than what's being said is not said. Less is not being said. Oftentimes people will add or take from the Bible by changing, rearranging, interpreting, exegeting, or even adding by way of interpretation of what the Word itself says, certain meanings that maybe God didn't mean it that way. The best way to understand the Word of God is to let God speak for Himself and to let the Word be read and heard. And God said, let there be light. What did God say? Let there be light. And what happened? And there was light. It doesn't say God said more than that. It doesn't say that God professed, confessed, or even did anything else. All it says is that God said, let there be light. And there was light. I like that. I like the fact that it's so simple, it's easy to be heard, it's easy to be understood. There's no massive interpretation required. There's no more explanation needed than simply what we have read, what we have heard, and what we're handling with our own hands. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. In the Word of God in Genesis 1:3, we know what it says. It's very clear. It's specific to what God said. It is intentional of what God said. There is no other way to say it except that God said, let there be light, and there was light. When people interpret or change the Word of God, they will act on behalf of or in spite of or by directive of mankind trying to operate in God's way. When God says something, something occurs. If God gave us His Word, and this is the Word of God, and here we see in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 1, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. When God says something, we don't change it. When God says something, we don't rearrange it. When God says something, we do something. We listen and hear what God would say. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. It doesn't say there was darkness before. This verse itself says one thing. It says simply that God said. Now, what it says is simply that when God said something, what He said was, let there be light. Now, it does talk about there being an effect of God saying, let there be light. And that effect that we're told is, and there was light. There's an interesting way of reminding ourselves that we need to not change, but rather understand what God is saying without there being more than what God has said. When we try to add some kind of interpretation, when we try to add some kind of explanation, when we try to play God instead of letting God speak for Himself, we change this verbal communication. The Bible as it is written was once communicative by way of people telling the story as opposed to reading the book. It once, as it is written and as it is written down, is written in a verbal way of communicating a story. You've heard the expression, once upon a time. In the Bible, when you hear it verbally, instead of saying once upon a time, we hear, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. That's sitting around a campfire talking about what God said, what God did, how He did it, and what He did do when He said it. So you have heard now in VidDevoBible 7 minutes in the Word of God. Verse chapter 1, verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And that's your word that you have heard.